Hi, this is Aud Mason-Hyde with ACircleMagazine.
Hi, Aud. So the first question is, the film Jimpa was produced by your mother, Sophie. And how did you two adjust to switching the relationship from mother and child in a family to director and actor at the film set?
Yeah, it was very interesting working with my mum as a director and kind of learning how to be professional on a film set, you know, not just be mother and child. I think we were helped along a lot by the fact that she's been making films with me my whole life. So I feel very much like I've been part of the process. And so it was kind of a natural transition. There were definitely some funny moments. I think that probably the funniest was I had my 19th birthday on set, and it was the day we were shooting an argument scene between Frances, my character, and Hannah, their mum. And so I rocked up to set on my birthday, and I spent my birthday, you know, being directed by my real mum to have an argument with my fake mum, which I think was quite funny. But you know, my mother and I are very close. We're best friends and collaborators, and so, you know, we just had the best time working together. We really got along.
Does Hannah, who was played by Olivia Colman in the film, represent Sophie's struggles in her real life?
Does Hannah represent Sophie's struggles? Yes and no. I think every character in the film, there's like an element of truth and an element of fiction. And I think Hannah probably more than the others even. I would say that, you know, Hannah's avoidance of conflict is very dramatized. You know, that's been turned up to the max. A lot of the struggles are maybe real struggles that the family has or that mum has, but they're much smaller in real life, and they're kind of dialed up for the purpose of dramatization. And so I think also, like, the thing about Hannah is that she would never actually make this movie about her family, whereas my real mum did make the movie. And so I think that's probably part of it too, is that we're all just that little bit bolder than our characters. And so yes and no is my ambiguous answer.
For the majority, like such as we don't usually introduce ourselves as heterosexual or like straight while greeting new people.
Yes.
However, they always clarify their identities as queer, non-binary, bisexual, lesbian, or trans while greeting someone new. Do you think this is a proof that members from LGBT group are still considered as outliers in our society?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think, unfortunately, yes. Especially in certain places in the world, LGBT people are increasingly, maybe even, you know, pushed to the margins of society. And we know that's been the case in history, is that we've been, you know, marginalized and considered to be freaks and to be abnormal. And I mean, even the word queer, right, when it was first used, was a way to call us other. And a lot of us have reclaimed that, and there's a really interesting conversation in the film about, you know, whether that's something to be reclaimed or not. But I think that for me, certainly, like my queer and trans identity, the thing that I find most joy in is being unconventional and living unconventionally and trying to redefine what family means and what love means and how we can have beautiful community relationships that are outside of what we would consider normal or normative. And so for me, like, the goal isn't normal. The goal is happy. And if that means being a freak to some people, I'm fine with being a freak to some people. And I think, you know, that's really easy for me to say coming from Australia and looking the way I do and being able to sort of, you know, having the support of my family is a very privileged position. But also, I think we find our strength in banding together as a community, even when it's not trendy or marketable or palatable. And so, you know, I want to lean into all of those things about being queer.
In real life, do you prefer being called a daughter or a child?
Yeah, in real life I prefer being called child. It's an interesting thing when you become an adult and your parent still calls you their child. I think adult child is an interesting term. I mean, I think that's the thing is like, maybe that's why I love working with my family so much, is that they don't have to introduce me as their child. They can introduce me as their actor or their collaborator or their colleague, you know. There's so many words to use because we're so many things to each other. But yeah, no, never daughter for me.
Okay, we'll just call you Aud then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Just Aud is perfect.
Do you believe in polyamory?
Yeah, I do. I do believe in polyamory. Yeah. I mean, what does it mean to believe in it? It exists. People do it. So yes, I think it's a really interesting model. I think there's so many questions that polyamory asks of us to consider. You know, I think it's the same as when any kind of alternative model of living is posed, you know, when anything is outside of the status quo. What it asks of us is to really genuinely interrogate what we want and what kinds of lives we want to lead. And so even if it's not for everyone, I think there are some really interesting conversations to be had in, you know, considering polyamory as a way of life and considering alternative and unconventional types of lives, because it allows us to dissolve social scripts and go beyond them into what are our actual human desires and happinesses. You know, how do we find those without worrying about what social structures decide they need to be or define them as, or what's normal or palatable or good, you know?
Or maybe this is a silly question, but how do we deal with the jealousy?
How do we deal with the jealousy? Look, I think polyamorous people are confronting that every day. I think there's a really interesting thing here where it's like, if you learn to reframe your emotional kind of things like jealousy, if you learn to reframe them as curiosity, you know, I'm feeling jealous right now. What am I not getting that makes me feel jealous? Or what about this situation is giving me that? Like, how do we reframe these feelings, especially negative emotions, or, you know, not negative emotions, but like things that maybe make us act out, jealousy and anger and sadness. How do we reframe them to be curiosity and openness towards our own experiences? I think, you know, that the way the film tackles the idea of compersion is so interesting, because also, you know, so much can be learnt from friendship, from deep friendship, you know, because the way that you would approach a friend having a new lover or a new love interest that they're excited about would be curiosity, excitement, you know, all of these other emotions. We would have compersion for them. We would be happy that they were happy. And so I think, especially in a polyamorous model, there's a really interesting thing to be found, which is that the basis of all your relationships is deep friendship. How do you respond to your partner having a new partner with curiosity and with excitement? And I think that's what is very interesting about that idea of compersion to me.
Is polyamory the same as what is called non-exclusive relationship?
I don't know. I think no and yes. Like, I think it's more like non-monogamy, and then within non-monogamy is like open relationships, and then polyamory is a slightly different thing. But I think, as with anything, the lines are a bit blurred, you know? I think it's a little more non-binary than that. You know, I don't think it's like open relationship over here, polyamory over here. I think they're all a little more intertwined than that. But, you know, people love in various ways, and as long as they're happy, I don't think we should be really batting an eye.
There was a scene where Hannah was holding hands with Richard while sitting next to the river, and Frances caught the moment. You know, in normal circumstances, Frances would have blamed their mother for cheating their father, but Frances did not. So what was Frances thinking at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing, because I don't know if Frances would normally be too worried about it. I think the really gorgeous thing about the family that we put on screen is that they are very open to each other and very, you know, they don't come at things with judgment. They come at things with questions and love. And I think that's such an interesting twist on the kid sees their parent cheating narrative that we sometimes see in films and TV. I think Frances's real true emotion in that moment is just, I think they see a flicker of a side of their mum that they've never seen. And I think one of the real messages of the film is that we, in parenting, the most generous thing you can do is show your child the messy parts of you and the human parts of you. Because when a child learns to understand their parent as a whole human, not as this perfect idea of mum or dad, but as a whole person, who makes mistakes and does strange things and, loves multiple people or, whatever the thing is, leaves them to go to Amsterdam to pursue a career, right? There's so many iterations in the film. When a parent does that, there's hurt and there's pain, but there's also, that child learns about autonomy and learns about parenting and learns about all of the things they could do with their life. It sort of opens the world up to them. And so I think it's one of the gifts that Hannah gives Frances as a parent is by showing them the messy parts of her. And I think actually that in that moment on the bridge, Frances looking at Richard and Hannah, there's just a kind of hopeful curiosity in them. They're like, oh, who is this? What are you doing? Does this mean something about you that I didn't realize? I think it's a reassessment of who they thought their mum was, which I think is actually a really beautiful thing.
Do you think Hannah has truly forgiven her father Jimpa for leaving her when she was 13? And was that one of the reasons why Hannah was so ready to say goodbye to her father?
Gosh, has Hannah forgiven Jim? Look, I think the answer is no. I think Hannah has repressed the feeling, and I think that Hannah's avoidance of conflict really has led to her not being able to forgive Jim because she hasn't accepted that she was hurt by Jim. But obviously, it's a hurtful thing for your parent to leave you when you're so young, to pursue their career and their dreams and the life that they want. And I think that in so many ways, Hannah and Jim would both have been happier if they had had a conflict about it and then repaired and been able to forgive each other, or Hannah be able to forgive Jim, because as beautiful as it is that she has the kind of relationship she has with him, it could be so much deeper if she allowed herself to be angry with him. And so I think no, she hasn't forgiven him. I don't know if that leads to some of her feelings about him dying. I think the question of Jim's death is much more about autonomy and much more about quality of life and about, what he wants out of his life. And Hannah becomes sort of a champion for Jim being able to be selfish in the last hours of his life, and being able to stop giving and just go, which is a beautiful thing, yeah.
And how do you deal with conflicts in real life?
How do I deal with conflict in real life? I'm learning, I would say, to have healthy conflict, which I think is like a lifelong mission to learn how to have healthy conflict, probably. The family in the film is not dissimilar to my family. We're very, we have big open discussions, but I wouldn't call them conflicts. It's very rare that we get mad with one another, or it's definitely very rare that we express that anger. And at so many points that's been such a wonderful thing, but definitely approaching other relationships, I'm learning through my friends and partners to talk things through and express when you're hurt and be angry at each other and accept that it's not always personal and you can move past it, and actually that having healthy conflict and not avoiding it is the most respectful thing. Right? Like if I respect you enough to tell you when you've hurt me, that means that I feel safe with you and I trust you and we can, I'm gonna hold you accountable. That's how much I respect you and love you. And so if we can do that and have a conflict and repair from it, we're gonna be so much stronger in whatever our relation is. And so I think I'm learning to do that. It's gonna be a lifelong process, but I think, it's deeply enjoyable.
The last question, how did taking part in this movie help you get to know who you are?
Yeah, It's funny, I think showing up to set every day making this film, it felt a little bit like inner child therapy. I was like, there's little me and I have to love them and support them and be them, you know, like I have to be Frances. And I have such a soft spot for Frances still, you know, even the things that I think are different to me or that I find annoying about Frances, I still just think they're so precious and beautiful. They have a special place in my heart. Making this film absolutely was instrumental in sort of discovering new things about myself and about my family, solidifying some ideas about, certainly about interpersonal relationships. And also, I think one of the most interesting parts of making this film was being able to meet so many beautiful older queer and LGBT people. You know, we worked with an ensemble of older queer characters, and the actors of those characters, Hans Kesting, Frank Sanders, and 𝘈𝘳𝘥𝘦𝘯𝘕 were just so excellent to work with. And we just had such a blast, and we were just laughing. And, you know, one of the real things that we wanted to showcase with this film is intergenerational connections between LGBT communities. Like, how do we have more dialogue between younger and older queer and trans people? It's funny because that's what we wanted to show with the film, but in doing so, we brought together a lot of younger and older trans and queer people. And so we did it while we were making a film about it. And so for me, like as a young queer and trans person, to meet all of these older gay men and hear about their experiences and talk with them and spend time with them, I think that was probably the part that I found the most special. And also, even though my real Jimpa, you know, is dead, I got to commune with him, you know. I got to sort of spend a year of my life imagining what it would be like to have that conversation with him. I spent a year of my life, you know, doing all this work to sort of honor him with accountability, acknowledge that he was probably, you know, a bit mean sometimes and we would probably argue a lot, but still love each other very deeply. And so I think I got to know him more than I did in life. And I also got to know myself through my community in a really beautiful way. So it's been such a pleasure to make the film.